Sister pushes pregnant me down the stairs as a prank. Parents threaten to disinherit me for pressing charges. I ended up in the hospital after my sister shoved me down the stairs during her party, claiming it was a harmless joke. My parents are now threatening to take away my inheritance if I file a complaint. I am 4 months pregnant at the moment, 28F. For the past 2 years, Newton, my spouse, and I have been attempting to conceive. To be honest, there were times when we thought we might not make it. The wait seemed to go on forever. Then, somewhat unexpectedly, we learned I was expecting. Given all of the challenges we've faced thus far, this pregnancy holds immense significance for us. The fact that we will soon be welcoming our first child into the world makes us incredibly happy. Newton and I decided to be extra careful this time because I've had miscarriages in the past. We made the decision to conceal the pregnancy until we were positive that everything was going according to plan, in order to protect our emotional health. If for whatever reason we also lost this pregnancy, we wanted to shield ourselves from the extra pain of having to grieve in public. My younger sister Elle and my parents were unaware of my pregnancy until last week. At times, it seemed weird to keep them in the dark, but I also needed the time to think things through. From significant life events to minor triumphs, my family has always been the kind to celebrate everything. To be honest, I adore that quality about them. We've created a ton of wonderful memories together throughout the years, and it adds a special touch to every occasion. But when it comes to going to family gatherings, I've been a little aloof from for the last 4 months. Given how emotionally taxing the pregnancy was, I simply needed more time for me. However, my younger sister Elle was ecstatic when she received a promotion at work last week. Last year, Elle's ideal wedding was meant to take place, but at the last minute, everything went wrong. Her ex cheated on her with one of his coworkers at his bachelor party the night before the wedding. The groom didn't even have the grace to show up and speak to Elle on the day of the wedding. Rather, one of his buddies arrived to break the heartbreaking news that he had made the decision to completely cancel his participation in the wedding. The entire scenario was really embarrassing, and our entire family was startled. It was meant to be one of the most joyful days of her life, and we had spent a lot of time getting ready for it. Elle was heartbroken. All of her hopes and excitement for her future with this man had been dashed in such a public and harsh manner. Elle immersed herself into her career after that. She used it as a coping mechanism to keep herself occupied and diverted from the pain. Although she has always been driven and ambitious, her commitment to her work increased significantly following the wedding disaster. Therefore, her recent promotion marked a significant turning point in her career and personal life. She virtually pleaded with me to come since she wanted to celebrate the occasion with a party. I could tell she truly missed having me around when she said she hadn't seen me in a long time. Additionally, I was being urged to attend by my parents, who kept urging me to do so and expressing how much it would mean to her. Given that I hadn't attended the last few family get-togethers, I really didn't want to let her down. I therefore at last consented. However, I didn't want to detract from Elle's accomplishment on her special night by being obviously pregnant and taking away the emphasis. The last thing I wanted was that. I didn't want to detract from her moment. I wanted her to experience it. But it was becoming more and more difficult to conceal as the baby bump grew. For one night, though, I believed I could handle it. In order to hide my tummy, I wore a long flowing dress. I even went so far as to apply shapewear to reduce the bump as much as possible. I was determined to keep Elle in her promotion front and center. Everything appeared to be proceeding as planned when I arrived at Elle's party. I felt a little more at ease knowing that my attempts to conceal my pregnancy were successful because no one had any suspicions when my mother saw that my arms and cheeks appeared somewhat plumper than normal. She didn't say anything, however. I had already considered how to respond to such circumstances, so I swiftly responded with a joke that I had simply been eating a lot lately. To be honest, I was relieved that they were less likely to detect the truth about my pregnancy, and more likely to believe that I was simply putting on weight. For now, that seemed like the safer course of action. As the evening wore on, I became more and more aware of how uncomfortable I was. The celebration seemed to go on forever, and I'm not used to staying up late anymore. Newton, my husband, arrived at the party right from work, and was enjoying himself. I was grateful that he continued to periodically check in with me to make sure I was doing okay. Elle and the rest of my family were having a great time in the meantime. They were having a great time dancing in the backyard and doing shots. Seeing Elle so joyful and carefree, especially after everything she's been through, made me glad. However, I began to feel nauseous, most likely due to the heat of the evening and all the greasy food. I slipped inside and found a peaceful seat on the couch after deciding I needed to escape the boisterous dancing and loud music. At that moment, my only true desire was to get home, raise my feet, possibly massage my legs, get into bed, and read on my Kindle for a little while. I briefly closed my eyes in an attempt to relax and collect myself. My Aunt Mia sat down beside me at that moment, waking me up. I had fallen asleep without even realizing it. Without providing a reason, I shook my head when she offered me a glass of wine. She went on to say that I looked pregnant, and that my face was nearly glowing the entire evening. I froze, unsure of how to respond. Aunt Mia is no fool, so I tried to shrug it off. Avoiding eye contact and feeling uncomfortable, she asked me directly, "Are you really pregnant?" as her eyes widened in shock. Despite my inner panic, I made an effort to remain calm. In an attempt to divert her attention, I shook my head, but Aunt Mia put her hands on my stomach, and her eyes brightened with total conviction. "Oh my God, darling, you are pregnant!" she cried. She chuckled and drew me into an embrace. I was a little alarmed and practically begged her not to tell anyone just yet because I didn't think the time was perfect to make the announcement. However, Aunt Mia dismissed my worries. She reminded me that everyone had been eagerly anticipating this time, hoping that I would become pregnant, and demanded that the family should be informed of this wonderful news. Aunt Mia smiled at me, held my face in her hands, and reminded me that it was a family night. Even though I told her it was Elle's night, she told me not to overthink it and that, because everyone had come together, it was the ideal moment to share. Everyone was still dancing and partying when Aunt Mia got up and went outside before I could stop her. As I saw her, my heart fell. Aunt Mia captured everyone's interest with all the zeal in the world. Without wasting a beat, she pointed at me and told everyone that I was pregnant after telling them she had some important news to deliver. There was a moment of stillness while everyone processed Aunt Mia's words. Then, everyone in the party burst out. My relatives hurried over to me, around me, with congratulations, shouts, and hugs. They were ecstatic, giving me a tight hug while crying and expressing their excitement for Newton and me. They were naturally thrilled to hear the news because they were all aware of my past miscarriages. My parents were so emotional that they were crying in celebration of this new chapter in our lives. Many congratulated Newton and gave him hugs as well. I definitely didn't want to reveal my pregnancy in this way. I had imagined a more private, intimate event, something modest and unique, something I could share with my family when I was ready. At a gathering that was supposed to be all about Elle, I had instead been dragged into the spotlight. I saw her standing off to the side at that point, smiling as best she could but obviously feeling uncomfortable. She avoided making eye contact with me and wasn't participating in the festivities. I was overcome with remorse because I had worked so hard to stay out of situations like these. I approached her and apologized for Aunt Mia's disclosure of my pregnancy. Elle inhaled deeply and inquired as to why I hadn't before disclosed my pregnancy. I clarified that I had intended to make the announcement a few weeks later when I was more at ease and prepared to do so. She pursed her lips, shook her head, and murmured, "Whatever. I suppose your request was granted." I was surprised by her response, and her comments hurt. I attempted to reason with her, But Elle didn't seem interested in having a conversation. She moved away after taking a sip of her wine and stopped focusing on me. Overwhelming advice from friends and family on being a first-time parent consumed the remainder of the evening. Everyone appeared excited to share their experiences and advice. Elle, in the meantime, continued to glare at me from the other side of the room, as though I was somehow to blame for everything. I felt much more guilty and uneasy after her response. I had an overwhelming want to go to the bathroom. At one point, I stood up and went to the guest bathroom, but it was completely packed. I went upstairs to use the restroom in the main bedroom because I felt like my bladder was going to explode. I went to the bathroom to relieve myself, and when I came out, Elle was waiting for me outside. She appeared inebriated. Sensing the awkwardness between us, I tried to apologize again with an awkward smile. Elle didn't appear to get any softer, rather. She simply rolled her eyes and inquired, "Are you truly expecting?" There was a hint of suspicion in her voice, and her tone was almost contemptuous. "Of course I am," I said, looking at her while reflexively touching my tummy. "Why would I tell a falsehood?" I went on to add that everything was extremely strange, particularly since I hadn't even told our mother, with whom I often spoke daily, that I was pregnant. I was becoming annoyed by her incessant interrogation. I attempted to reiterate my justifications in the hopes that she would realize that I had made the decision to keep it a secret. I was shocked by Elle's insensitivity when she said, in a callous tone, which pierced my heart, "Maybe this pregnancy will also end in miscarriage, just like your previous ones." How could she have said such a disgusting thing about my child? I screamed at her, my voice shaking with fury and hurt. "How dare you say such a thing? Even though I've apologized multiple times tonight, your remarks were inappropriate." My voice reverberated in exasperation. Elle retorted that she was upset that I had taken away her attention, particularly considering everything that had happened to her the previous year. I made an effort to remind her that I had supported her through her sadness, staying at her house for several nights and assisting her in getting over her groom's abandonment. I assured her that I would never purposefully overshadow her, and that she should blame Mia for outing me without my permission if she was upset about the outcome. But Elle kept pointing the finger at me. I felt it would be better to leave and head back downstairs because I was so exhausted and tired of the debate. In the hopes that Elle would settle down, and we could talk about it later. I needed some time and space to think things through. Elle, who was right behind me, kept calling me a selfish person and stating that I should have just given her a night alone. I chose to ignore her, but just as I was about to head downstairs, I felt a strong shove from behind. As I slipped and struggled to regain my footing, my eyes widened in shock. In an attempt to save myself from falling, I was able to grab the railing. But my knees gave way under the combined force of my own weight and speed. I ended up sliding headfirst down the steps after losing my footing. My instincts took control in an instant. Desperate to protect my baby from the impact, I covered my stomach with my hands. My wrist felt the entire force of my fall as my body crashed down the stairs. It was a nasty fall. A quick, searing pain shot through my hands, and I heard an explosive shatter. The agony was sudden and intense. I lay collapsed on the stairs and screamed in pain as I struggled with the unbearable pain in my wrist. My surroundings became hazy. But my top priorities were my son, and if the fall had hurt him in any way. The rest of the family soon saw the chaos caused by my fall and my calls for assistance. With worried and alarmed expressions on their faces, they hurried over in a frenzy. Chaos broke out in the room as everyone sought to comprehend what had just transpired. Newton, my husband, grabbed me up right away and carried me downstairs. I continued saying that Elle had shoved me down the stairs. Since I was in so much pain, everyone appeared astonished. Everyone's attention was drawn to Elle, who stood behind me, silent, with a guilty expression. She was confronted by my husband, who yelled at her for pushing a pregnant woman down the stairs. Clearly upset. My mother hurried up to Elle, shaking her shoulders and asking if she had indeed shoved me. Elle cried and nodded in agreement, her face hot and distraught. My mother was deeply affected by the realization. Elle then started crying excessively while embracing my mother and accusing her of being intoxicated and acting recklessly. I was in so much pain and shock that I was beginning to pass out. I could hear Newton frantically phoning 911 to summon an ambulance. Through the fog, I could just make out the worried faces around me as my vision became blurry. After then, everything was a haze of sirens, chaos, and frenzied activity. I ended up in a hospital room when I eventually came to. Newton appeared worn out as he slept in a chair next to my bed. My throat was dry and parched, so I gently woke him up and asked for some water. I asked him what had transpired following the fall as he assisted me in drinking the water. Newton described how the pain had caused me to lose consciousness, and how I had needed emergency care for wrist fractures. I would have to wear the cast the doctors had put on me for the next 4 to 6 weeks while my bones healed. I then inquired about the baby. Newton told me that our child was safe after the physician's examination. I felt a wave of relief knowing that our baby would be all right, which made me happy. The anarchy that had developed following the disaster was then explained to me by Newton. Elle's family was so upset with her that they attempted to have her arrested. But the cops had only been able to get statements from the witnesses. Because I was unconscious before they could file any charges, they still needed my formal statement. Newton grasped my hands and emphasized the need for me to report my sister's behavior and put aside my feelings for her. He was adamant, saying that considering my condition, there was no excuse for her to shove me down the steps. Still in shock, I shook my head. It was nearly impossible for me to comprehend how Elle could have done something so damaging. Although my wrist hurt physically, I could not handle the emotional toll of knowing that my own sister was capable of such harmful behavior. I wanted to talk to Elle first. I told Newton I had to know what had made her do such horrible things in order to get an explanation or at least an apology. I needed to speak with her directly. Newton gave me his phone and dialed her number. I asked my sister directly why she had done what she had done. When she responded, Elle let out a long sigh as though the words were hard to release. And then she opened up. In a bitter tone, she uttered, "To be honest, I'm just so sick of you being the center of attention in our family. You have a husband now, you're pregnant. You get to have everything in your life. But last night was supposed to be my night only, yet, as usual, you showed up with your pregnancy announcement and hogged all the attention." After a little silence, she spoke again in a defensive tone. "And pushing you down the stairs, that was just a harmless prank. I didn't even think you were really pregnant at first. I didn't mean for it to be such a big deal." Her remarks were painful and disturbing. It was unbelievable to me that she would put my life in jeopardy by pushing me down the stairs because she didn't want to trust me. Before I could respond, Elle added, "I've been through a lot with my failed engagement, and for you to just show up and rub your happiness in my face was just too much. Next time, I'm sure you'll think twice before trying to overshadow me again." Her answer left me in a state of shock. She was essentially blaming me for her actions and showed no remorse at all. She hadn't even shown regret once. Elle handed the phone to my mother, who had been listening on the other end, and she inquired about my well-being. I was unaware that my sister and my parents were still present. I informed her that I had suffered a fracture to my wrist, but that both I and my infant were doing well. After the party, my mom told me that she, Dad, and Elle had spent the entire night at Elle's house because they were all concerned about me. I sneered and said that instead of staying with my sister, they might have waited for me at the hospital if they were that concerned. My mom went on to say that she and Dad had been speaking with Elle and that they both thought she hadn't been feeling well since last night. Despite what other people were telling me, she insisted that I not report my sister to the police because it was only a foolish drunken error. I was taken aback by my mother's request. In an attempt to understand the situation, I questioned, Why are you defending Elle when she hasn't even apologized to me? With a heavy sigh, my mother said that Elle was currently dealing with a lot of difficulties. She said that Elle had been crying uncontrollably, and that I had made her feel ashamed in front of everyone. I reminded my mother that they should first address the fact that Elle had shoved me down the stairs, which was the true problem. My mother began stressing that family is family, and that disputes like these occasionally occurred among sisters. Although it was true that Elle had never done anything like this before, she pointed out that this did not justify her current actions. My mother said that it wasn't worth filing a lawsuit for a broken wrist, and pledged to work with Dad to ensure that this doesn't happen again. My annoyance peaked. I adamantly said that I had been unsure of what to do before I phoned her, but I had already made up my mind. After speaking with Elle, a lesson had to be given to her. My mother, who was becoming more and more agitated, pleaded with me to think again before bringing charges against Elle. She warned that doing so may ruin her career. I informed her that right now I couldn't give a damn about it. My mother made a last-ditch effort to persuade me to bring charges against Elle by threatening to disinherit me if I did. She contended that it would impact Elle for the rest of her life and create a lasting record. I was stunned by her threat, but I refused to back down. I proceeded to pursue a complaint against my sister. After the phone call, she hadn't expressed regret for what she had done, but I was torn about perhaps ruining her life. Update 1. I wanted to let you know that my sister was eventually taken into custody. Despite the constant calls from my parents, my spouse and I have turned off our phones. Newton is furious that my parents appear to be giving preference to my sister over me. Newton's family and other family members have contacted him in the interim to show their concern and support. Everyone agrees that it was the correct thing to charge my sister. I'm much more concerned about my baby's safety now that I've read some of your remarks. I'm worried that Elle could endanger my unborn child in the future if she were able to shove me down the stairs. In order to prevent her from ever coming near me or my family again, I want to obtain a restraining order against her. Update 2. Hi there, other Redditors. My sister, who was previously accused of assault, was just sentenced. Since I provided an update last month, my parents paid for her attorney, who was quite good and made a compelling argument. She was placed on probation because it was her first infraction. The judge mandated that Elle pay for my medical expenses, participate in 6 months of required psychotherapy, and meet with a probation officer on a regular basis. After the criticism they've been getting from the rest of the family, my parents are still very angry with me, but are too scared to address me. My parents urged me to protect Elle by not pursuing charges against her, and I have freely acknowledged this to everyone. My parents have received reprimands from relatives on both mine and my husband's sides. No one believes that Elle's mental health issues are a good enough reason for what she did to me, despite my parents' continued insistence on it. In order for Elle to recover, I sincerely hope that my parents will take her to visit a doctor. I've requested a restraining order after the sentencing to make sure she can't ever again come near my family or me. I honestly don't know how to respond to people who question if my sister was always kind to me when we were growing up or if perhaps I missed certain clues. Yes, we occasionally battled and had our typical arguments, but I never thought she would have such a strong grudge against me. I've always loved her dearly as her older sibling, and I never imagined that she could push me down the stairs out of retaliation. Believe me, I'm just as astonished as everyone else. I suppose it's accurate to say that those closest to us are frequently the ones that betray us. Update 3. I haven't posted anything here in 5 months. Neither Newton nor I have seen Elle or communicated with my parents. I gave birth to my baby 5 days ago, after being released from the hospital. Newton and I are now giving our newborn baby the finest care possible. I heard a tap on the door last night, right before we sat down to eat. I was surprised to see my mother standing on my porch. When I opened it, I was totally surprised because I had not anticipated seeing her. I said, "What are you doing here?" with caution. My husband was just as perplexed as I was to find her there. So he moved up next to me and stood guard in front of me. My mother burst into tears at once, telling me that she had just had to come over to meet the baby after hearing from some of the relatives that I had given birth to. Considering everything that had lately transpired between us, her excitement didn't seem appropriate. She continued by expressing how happy she and her father were to be grandparents at last. In order for us to rejoice as a family, she said that Dad would be coming soon with some wine and baby presents. Newton and I exchanged a look of incredulity. Did my mother truly act as though nothing had happened in the past few months? As quietly as possible, I told her that we hadn't communicated in the previous 5 months because she had chosen to side with Elle rather than me. She was standing on my porch, however, pretending that we were all on good terms simply because I had given birth, as if we were going to have a happy family reunion. Newton informed my mother that the instant she decided not to be a decent parent to me, first, she had given up her right to be a grandma. He reminded her that Elle had treated me cruelly, and that he would have beaten her up immediately if she hadn't been my sister, but she had shielded that monster from me because she was a mother. I could tell his remarks struck a chord because they were forceful. My mother's expression changed to one of rage. She attempted to counter by claiming that those were matters of the past, and that she had done what she had to do. She maintained that we couldn't simply remove her and her spouse from our child's lives. She emphasized how unjust it was that we prevented her from seeing her grandchild. Newton, however, would have none of it. He told her that we chose who could be engaged in his life because this was our boy. Having her in our lives made neither of us feel at ease. My mother persisted in claiming that the reason she did what she did to me was because Elle had been diagnosed with depression. I shook my head in exasperation as my mother continued to defend Elle's behavior, saying she felt bad about what she had done and was trying to change. She promised that after my son was born, we would all be able to move on from the past and be a single happy family. I sneered and clarified that I didn't desire such a thing. My mother believed she could simply ignore everything and return to our life, but circumstances had changed. There was no return to the previous state of affairs. I asked my mom to go because I couldn't take any more of it. After everything that had been said thus far, I didn't want to ruin my mood any further. Just then, my father pulled into our driveway. He exited the vehicle with a basket of presents and a large teddy bear. I was too exhausted to argue with my parents any longer, and I couldn't understand their insolence in showing up without warning. Fortunately, Newton intervened and told me to return inside and rest. He promised to deal with them and resolve the issue. I reluctantly allowed him to. I could still hear their words coming through the door as I made my way back inside. Newton's refusal to let them both in almost immediately sparked the uproar because he was family. My dad insisted repeatedly that he had every right to see me and the baby. My normally composed hubby lost his temper. If they didn't leave our land right away, he threatened to contact the police. Naturally, my dad persisted in arguing and insisted on leaving the baby presents behind, as though it would somehow make up for everything. Newton, meanwhile, was adamantly against taking anything from them. He made it clear to them that we did not accept their presence, and that we would also obtain a restraining order against them if they ever revealed their identities again. His response clearly shook my parents. After everything, especially with a baby now involved, I suppose they thought they could just waltz back into our lives. I was pleased with my husband's handling of the matter. After our conversation today, Newton and I have decided to put cameras throughout the house as a precaution. I wish to never again see my parents. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.